Good evening, my friends. Welcome to Outlandish Talmud Stories, Outstanding Life Lessons, Part 24. Tonight's class titled Different Reactions During Crises. I want to thank tonight's sponsor, Jonathan and Rachel Mizels, who have dedicated tonight's class in honor of Jonathan's birthday this week. Mazal Tov. May God bless you with a Shnat Hatzlacha, a safe, successful, healthy, happy, prosperous year filled with lots of joy and nachas from your family. Thank you. And if you'd like to dedicate a class, there's a link in the video description, and that would help us continue what we're doing. Also, the link to the source sheet, the story we're going to study tonight, is in the video description, so download it. Tonight we're studying a story from Talmud Gittin, page 56a. Indeed, an outlandish story with some outstanding life lessons. So what happens to you? How do you react to a time of crisis? And this is something that's been on our minds probably for quite some time now, because our world is in a state of crisis. Now, it feels like we're always in a state of crisis, but now particularly with the pandemic that began already quite some time ago, beginning of this year, which has truly changed and truly affected everybody around the entire world. And think about the way that you've reacted, the way that you have dealt with it, how you handle it, how you handle yourself, how things play out in your interaction with others. You know, they say that people's true colors come out during times of crises. Now, that may be a harsh expression, and we never judge somebody when they're going through a crisis on how they behave and how they react, because who are we to judge? And the crisis could be anything. It could be a personal crisis, a financial meltdown, a loss of a job, bankruptcy, all kinds of failures, professional failures, personal failures. It could be an ailment, an illness, a death in the family. It could be all kinds of sorrow that a person may go through. Could be a shalom bayit, it could be a breakdown in a relationship, a divorce, who knows what. Then there's the collective kind of crisis, when something affects a community or a country or a world, and everybody's in it together. You know, we look historically, I mean, I don't want to bring up a comparison, but it's another crisis in terms of the Holocaust. And we know all kinds of stories about people in concentration camps and how different people behaved in different ways, vis-a-vis themselves or vis-a-vis others, in terms of how helpful they were to others, or how committed they were to their own personal survival, sometimes at the expense of hurting others. Again, we never cast judgment on the way someone behaves during a crisis, but I want to talk about for myself, or you for yourself, to think about how would you, or how do you react in a state of crisis? And how do you hold your senses? And you're able to rationally think it through and behave in a responsible way, in a way that represents hope and faith and courage? Or do you completely lose it? And do you become all panicky and possibly selfish and self-centered and behave in completely inappropriate ways? So it's an important question to think about, because hopefully, please God, you or I will never enter a real state of crisis. I mean, we've been in one right now, as I said, and we can reflect on the kind of thoughts and behaviors and things we've been doing and we've been having. But that's an issue that I'm going to be using a story tonight that really outlines a severe state of crisis. It was a national crisis for the Jewish people historically. And we're going to encounter different people, how they reacted in different ways. And we're going to contrast some people's behavior versus other people's behavior. And there's going to be so much to learn from. So our story tonight takes us all the way back to the 1st century after the Common Era. And this is in the weeks or the years leading up to the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the year 70 after the Common Era, destroyed by the Roman Empire. Now, in a few days' time, we're coming up to a fast day, and it's known as the fast of the 10th of Tevet. That's the month of Tevet. And we fast. Why do we fast on that day? Because that marks the anniversary of when the Roman army laid siege around Jerusalem. And that final step in their conquer of Jerusalem and Israel was being cemented as they laid siege around Jerusalem. And at that point, all chaos began in Jerusalem, and all kinds of supplies began to stop coming in. So food was a problem, and water was a problem. Supplies for the temple, supplies for people's homes, medical supplies, all these kinds of things were running in shortage when you have a siege. And now it's like a ghetto, and a group of people living in the ghetto have to live with each other, or have to figure out how they're going to deal with their situation, how they're going to respond, react with the enemies who are surrounding them. So many decisions to make. And who makes the decisions, and how do you make them, and what's the right decision? So this is some of the quandaries that were going on at that time in the ghetto, in the siege laid around Jerusalem. Now, just interestingly, this year, the fast of Tevet falls out on a Friday. Very, very rare do we ever fast on a Friday. Only when the 10th of Tevet. That's the only fast day that can fall out on a Friday, and it happens extremely rarely. It happened once about 20 years ago, maybe a little less. And before then, it happened even longer before, I believe. And I can't recall when the next time it's going to happen, but it's very rare in the Jewish calendar. And it's rare because we're not supposed to have fast days on Fridays. In fact, the way the Jewish calendar is designed is that Yom Kippur should not fall out on a Friday, because you don't want to be fasting on Friday and enter into Shabbat hungry and ravenous, which is not an appropriate mood and spirit to enter into Shabbat. I mean, you're supposed to enter Shabbat with an appetite so that you enjoy the Shabbat meals, which is why you're not supposed to sit down to a complete meal Friday afternoon. You can snack, but not a full meal. But definitely not hungry and ravenous, because, it's like going to a wedding, right? Or a simcha, a bar mitzvah. So, you want to come somewhat hungry because there's going to be a good meal over there. So you don't want to eat too much before you go there. But on the other hand, you don't want to starve yourself the whole day and come there hungry, because then you can't participate in the festivities. You're sitting there and things are taking time and the ceremonies are happening and you're not even involved or excited because you're busy. Your stomach is rumbling. So you should never enter Shabbat hungry, just with an appetite. Yet this Friday, we're going to enter Shabbat hungry, and we're going to break our fast over a cup of wine, which is the Kiddush, which makes it all the more challenging. I remember the last time I did it. So that's what's unique about this year's circumstance. But anyhow, the 10th of Tevet marks the anniversary of the siege. So I'm thinking about the siege. And tonight we're going to learn some stories that happened during that siege around Jerusalem. So we're learning Gittin, page 56a. I hope you've downloaded the source sheet. Before we read the story inside, I want to give you some background to the story. When the Romans decided to finally pull the last action to take over and destroy Jerusalem, they sent a general whose name was Nero to go and lead the army and run the campaign against Jerusalem. And I think we've learned or studied or at least spoken about this story before. And Nero, on his way, and he's entering into Israel, and he just wants to make sure this is the right thing. Now, even though he's an enemy of the Jews, an enemy of the Jewish gods, but in those days, they still believed in God, and they were still wary of the potential possibility of the truth of the Jewish God. And they didn't want to mess with the Jewish God, because if you did, you knew that trouble was going to come your way. So they had these intuitions, these spiritual senses within them. So Nero's not sure if this is the right thing. So the Talmud says that he did a bit of a test, an experiment. He took one arrow and he shot it to the north. And then the arrow turned and landed in Jerusalem. Another arrow to the south. Again, it turned, landed in Jerusalem. The west, the east, every direction he shot the arrow, it turned mid-air and landed in Jerusalem. Nero took this as a sign. The God, or the Jewish God, agrees with the fact that he's about to begin a campaign to destroy Jerusalem. So he advances further and closer towards Jerusalem. And as he gets there, he's still a little bit wary, still a little bit concerned. So he does another trick. What's the trick? He pulls over a young child who's walking down the street, coming home from cheder, coming home from school, and he asks the child, "Tell me a verse that you studied today." Now, this is quite a common thing. We know about this in the story of Purim, and other times there's a kind of prophecy when you just catch a child off guard and you ask him something that he learned and he tells you, and it's sort of hashgacha pratit, divine providence, it all comes together. that message which the child innocently gives you is truly a message for you. So when you ask the child, what is it that you studied today? The child repeated to him a verse, comes from the book of Yecheskel, chapter 25, verse 14, and the verse says, V'nosati es nikmasi be'edom, I will give over my vengeance against Edom, Rome, biyad ami Yisrael, into the hands of my nation, O Israel. In other words, Nero understood two things from this. On the one hand, there is an approval from God that the Jewish people and the Jewish state should fall into the hands of the Romans. But at the same time, God says, I will give over my vengeance to the Romans who will destroy my land of Israel. So Nero realizes that God may want the Jews to be destroyed, but he's going to meet his creator and he's going to have to suffer for it as well. So Nero said, this is not for me. I don't want to have any part of this. And he runs away. And tradition has it, the Talmud says he actually ran away and converted to Judaism, even at this very difficult time for the Jewish people. And apparently, Rabbi Meir, who's a great sage that we've studied about several times, he was a descendant of Nero. So now the Romans have lost their general. So word reaches the Roman emperor, and he goes ahead and he sends another general. This one even more ruthless, even more cruel than Nero. His name was Vespasian. And Vespasian is now sent to Jerusalem to take over the war. And this is where our story begins. The Roman authorities sent Vespasian Caesar against the Jews. He came and laid siege to Jerusalem for 3 years. It's actually about 2.5 years, because now in the month of Tevet, a little more, and then in 2.5 or 2 2/3 years' time will be Tisha B'Av, which marks the actual destruction of Jerusalem. Now, what's going on inside Jerusalem during this siege? The Talmud says there were at that time in Jerusalem these 3 wealthy people: Nakdimon, the son of Gurion, Ben Kalba Savua, and Ben Tzitzit Hakeses. Strange names. And who are these people? So the Gemara says their names are actually, may not be their real names, but it's their nicknames. It's the way we refer to them, because their names reflect on what made them so prominent and special to the community. So the Gemara explains, Nakdima Ben Gurion, what kind of name is that? He was called that name because of the sun shined on his behalf, as it's related elsewhere, that the sun once continued to shine in order to prevent him from suffering substantial loss. So Nakdimon Nakdal, it refers to the sun shining for him. What's the story of the sun shine for him? So actually the Gemara doesn't give the explanation, because you see it's not bold over here. This is how the translator has filled it in. There are actually a number of different commentaries of why he's given that name. One simple commentary is that this was a person that all these stars were shining in life. He was a recipient of great good fortune in life, and he made a lot of money. So his stars were shining. So Nakdima Ben Gurion, everything worked out for him in life. The other explanation, which the commentary here is referring to, is that you may know about this person. There's another story about him, which is on my to-do list to study with you one day. And that is that there was a severe drought, and Nakdima Ben Gurion stepped up, and he wanted to ensure there's going to be sufficient water to drink to the Jewish people, to the community. And it's a whole story about a deal that he made because he borrowed money, he had to pay back. It was a bet that he made, how if God's going to make it rain miraculously and fill up the pits of water. I don't want to go into it because I want to save it for another time. But the end of the story is that the rain was a little bit late in coming, and the deadline was coming. And once the sun set, he's going to lose the bet. So God made a miracle, and he held up the sun for him, so the day was extended. And this way, when the sun came down, the rain came down. It came down before the deadline, and he won the bet. So he wasn't just a wealthy person, but it was a person worthy of God performing this miracle for him, because he was someone who really stepped up to help the Jewish community. Next. The next person is Ben Kalba Savua, also a strange name. Ben, the son of Kalba. Kalba is the Aramaic for a dog. Savua means satiated, because anyone who entered his home, if he was as hungry as a dog, he would leave satiated. He was somebody that never closed his door on anybody. A bit like we think of Abraham and Sarah. And their tent, they would feed anybody. So too, if you were hungry, anywhere knew there's one place to go to, Ben Kaba Savu was home, and he would give you a meal no matter what, for free, which is also a very righteous, prominent person. What else do we know about him? We know that he was the father of a girl named Rachel. And he also owned a lot of cattle, a lot of sheep. He had a big farm. And he hired a special shepherd to take care of his animals. What was the shepherd's name? Akiva. And Akiva was an illiterate person, never got an education. And Rachel sees Akiva taking care of being such a wonderful shepherd. She falls in love with him. She wants to marry him. The father said, "Chutzpah, you're going to marry this ignorant, illiterate person. I can set you up with a big Talmid Chacham. I can set you up with somebody who will be a source of pride to our family." But she insisted on marrying him on condition that he would go and study because she saw his potential. So apparently Ben Kalba Savua takes her out of the will. She's not going to be supported by her father, even though he's a very wealthy man. She marries Akiva. Akiva goes and studies for 12 years or more, comes back with 24,000 students, and he's the famous Rabbi Akiva. Who knows if Ben Kalba Savua made the right decision, the wrong decision? You can decide for yourself. Next, the third one was Ben Tzitzis Kases. What's a strange name? So tzitzis, we know the fringes we put onto our garments. And the reason he's given this name is because his ritual fringes, the tzitzit, dragged along on blankets. Kaset means a blanket, meaning that he would not walk in the street with his feet on the ground, but rather they would take place blankets beneath him. So he was so wealthy that he had servants running around him wherever he was, and even to walk on the ground. Now, the ground in those days wasn't nice paved sidewalks or roads or nice grass. It was probably earth and mud and dirt. So the servants are busy placing all these sheets along the ground. So him, together with his fringes on his garments, everything, nothing got dirty and soiled from the earth, but it was always resting on these blankets. That's how wealthy he was. Another explanation, that keset can mean the cloth that we said, but it could also come from the root word kisei. Kisei means a chair, a seat. There are those that say that his seat was found among the nobles of Rome. Whenever he visited Rome, and apparently he was like a statesman or a good businessman, and he would visit other countries for business or diplomatic purposes, and he was highly recognized and respected, and he was always given a seat right with the nobles of Rome. Now, what about these three wealthy people? So the Gemara says, during this time of crisis, during the siege, and there was a lot of hunger, no food supplies, no drink, no animals, nothing could come in. These three wealthy people offered their assistance. One of them said to the leaders of the city, "I'll feed the residents with wheat and barley." The other said, "I'll provide wine, salt, and oil." And the other one said, "I'll supply the residents with wood." So you have plenty of wood to go around, which will fuel your fires, give you heat, and be able to cook. And plenty of wine, salt, oil, wheat, and barley, enough of the basic commodities, basic supplies to keep the community going. And these three wealthy men had between them enough commodities to sustain the besieged city for 21 years. Could you imagine how wealthy they were, how packed how many warehouses and silos they had to supply the community with food for 21 years. And they were willing to give it all away for free to save the community in crisis. Unbelievable. However, things never go as smooth as you want them. There were certain zealots among the people of Jerusalem. Who are these zealots? So the Gemara calls these people in the Biryonim. Who are these Biryonim? So we don't know too much about them. There's a little bit in the Talmud about them, and we also have a lot of this period of history. We know from the Talmud a little bit, or we also know from the book of Josephus. Josephus was not there at the time. He's already in Rome at the time, but he at least was writing down what he heard, or some say what he thought he heard, what he wanted to hear. So we know about different factions among the Jewish people. There were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, we've spoken about them before. And there were also the Biryonim, or the Kanoim, the Zealots. And Rashi, the commentary, says here, these were the kind of people that were Rekim. Rekim means they were sort of empty ruffians. They were boorish, they were wild. They were people that were inclined to violence. Every community has those people that like a little action, don't necessarily do things responsibly, rationally, cerebrally, through a process, through the committee. They just want to act, erratically, at whim, on their own, and do these wild, outlandish things. But often it could be the kind of person that it's really wild, boorish, ruffian kind of style, forcing things upon people. So these were the Kanoim. Now, these Kanoim did not see eye to eye with the established rabbinic or communal leadership of the community, or most people of the community at the time. So the sages said to them, help us. We want to go out and make peace with the Romans. We think that we should deal with this diplomatically. We're suffering. There's a siege going on. There's a chance they could destroy us, destroy the temple, or let's try to negotiate, okay? We can work this through in a peaceful way. But the Zealots did not allow them to do this. The Zealots said to the sages, let us go out and wage battle against the Romans, right? We're going to fight. We're not going to cave. We're not going to compromise. But the sages said to them, you won't be successful. You're a small group. You're not very well armed. That's a huge army. You have no chance. You're not allowed to fight a war that you have no chance of winning. It'd be better for you to wait until the siege is broken. In order to force the resident. Now, by the way, before we continue, we see this tension, this conflict a lot. Everyone's familiar with the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto, which is an amazing story, and a small band, relatively small band of people collected arms, came together, and attacked the Germans surrounding the ghetto. And they held them off for 30 plus days or so. And, it took, the Nazis conquered Poland in a day or 2 days. And here, a small band of people are defeating the Germans for a whole month or so, if I recall correctly. And the Germans had to bring in extra soldiers and officers and supplies, and eventually bring in major weaponry. And they ended up being a few survivors from that. But really, as a result of that, the whole ghetto was completely decimated, destroyed, and burned down. And if you read the history, not everyone was on board with them. And some people said, what are you doing? You're never going to win this. And maybe you're going to cause more people to die than were they to have died. Maybe some of us could survive, but now you're not going to give us that chance. And they argued, we're all going to die. Let's at least die with dignity. So that's the dilemma, the tension in the Warsaw Ghetto. But let's deal with this. So here we have the established communal rabbinic leadership saying that we're not going to fight. That's not going to work. In other words, you have to judge every situation for its own merits. In that situation, they understood that there's a chance to discuss this and possibly resolve it peacefully. And the Zealots said, absolutely not. So the Zealots were so crazy that what did they do? In order to force the residents of the city to engage in battle, the Zealots arose and burned down those storehouses of wheat and barley, and there was a general famine. 3 righteous, prominent, wealthy people stand up and say, we're going to supply the whole city with food for the next 21 years. How strong can the siege be if everyone inside has all their supplies? And these Zealots get up and they lay a fire to all of these storage houses, burn 21 years of food for a city to the ground, and now everyone's going to be starving again. So when you burn your bridges, you have no other chance. You've got to go and fight. So this was what these Zealots did to the Jewish community, which is tragic. Apparently, it's told that Vespasian said that God is a better general than he is, because God took care of the defeat of the Jewish people more than he could. That's what he said, that's how it appeared. The Jewish people were destroying themselves at the time. They didn't need the Romans to destroy them. Could you imagine burning all the food of the city and putting men, women, and child into a state of hunger? Now, these Binyamin did a lot of very fierce, aggressive tactics to the Jewish community, even beforehand, because they were trying to prove their point or force people to see things like them. There were times that they let in Roman mercenaries into the city to pillage and to cause all kinds of slaughter and persecutions. There was a lot of action, a lot of violence that was incited by these zealots against their own brothers and sisters. Very tragic. And now they're burning down the whole city, and they're causing everyone to essentially die of hunger. That's the worst. When the community itself, the Jew against the Jew, cannot see eye to eye to the extent that they start to harm one another. Which you can imagine, the Talmud says that the reason the temple was destroyed was because of sinas chinam, because of baseless hatred. In other words, God saw, gosh, you guys really can't get along, which is actually something that happens during a time of crisis. People have a hard time getting along. If there's a crisis in the family, if there's a lack of money, or chas v'shalom, a child dies or whatever, and two parents don't see eye to eye on this, that's a real challenge. And it can play out in many, many ways, but it could play out in a way that they start to fight with each other and argue with each other, and it can cause some great distance between them. It could even lead to divorce and breakup and all kinds of things, which is the collateral damage of the tragedy. So here we're going to learn about more collateral damage to the tragedy of the siege of the Romans. With regard to the famine, it's related to the following story. There was a woman whose name was Martha, the daughter of Baitos. She was also one of the wealthiest women of Jerusalem. Who was she? We don't know too much about her. We know she was very wealthy. We know that there was a person whose name was, that she was a widow, her husband passed away. And there was another man in Jerusalem at the time who was a Kohen, a priest. His name was Yehoshua, the son of Gamla. Also, someone we don't know too much about. And we know that he was not, not the greatest pious person. However, he does go down in the Talmud on record as having a wonderful tribute to him, because what's one of the things that he did. So he was the precursor to establishing a school system to allow all Jewish children, all children to be educated. What do I mean? So at that time, a bit earlier than his time, the custom or the tradition or the norm was that a parent taught a child. But there was no school structure yet. So a child learned Torah or life from the parents. What if a parent was ignorant and did not know any Torah? Okay, then the child suffered. The child didn't get an education. That was in the Jewish community. That was in the whole world. At some point, the rabbi stepped in and said it's not okay that if parents are unable to teach their children, then the children should suffer. So they decided that they're going to establish a school in Jerusalem. They're going to hire teachers, and parents can send their children to Jerusalem to be educated. That was an incredible concept, something novel, a revolution. And now a lot of parents were sending their kids to boarding school in Jerusalem. But again, people argued, what if a parent didn't have the means to send the children to Jerusalem? Then they suffered. So this wasn't a solution for all the children. So Yehoshua ben Gamla, our subject here that we're talking about right now, he came up with a new concept, a new decree. Actually, before him, then somebody said, let every major city have their own school with higher teachers. And then he argued, not everyone can make it even to the major schools in the big cities. Some families live on their farms in their remote villages. They have no way of sending their child, of transporting the child. They can't pay for the cab. So he insisted that every small town, every small village has to have a school. There has to be a cheder, there has to be a malamed, a teacher hired to teach the children everywhere. And like this, every child was given the opportunity to be educated. And this school concept, which today in our country, for example, in America, we take it for granted that we provide school and education to all children. It's the right of all children to be educated. This didn't exist throughout most of the history of the world. And in the Jewish community, it started first by Yehoshua ben Gamla. Okay, so this Martha, after she becomes widowed, she sets her eyes on Yeshua and she marries him. And she actually has big hopes for him. She says, well, if you're a Kohen, you should be the high priest, not just a regular priest. Now, to become a high priest, I mean, you have to have the credentials to be a high priest. You have to be wise. You have to be learned. You have to have the right temperament, etc., etc. But during the times of the Second Temple, we know that the position of the high priest. Eric Baum, very good comment. He says, if you look at the, we're going to put that on the screen, Ben Gamla. So Ben Gamla, which is the charter school system we have here, maybe in other places, was named after Yeshua Ben Gamla, who established the first school system. Thank you, Eric. Very good. So Yeshua Ben Gamla was not on the candidate list to become high priest. But during the times of the Second Temple, the whole position was very corrupt anyhow. And many people were buying their way in through money, through power, and they were not lasting very long in the position. Maybe they were dying in Yom Kippur in the Holy of Holies because they were not worthy of being there. So she paid a lot of money, like a lot of money, to the king at the time, that her new husband, Yeshua Ben Gamla, should become the high priest. And in fact, he ends up becoming the high priest, which he didn't last too long, because this is towards the end of the Second Temple, and already a couple of years before then, there were already a number of wars between the Jews and the Romans in various places in Israel, and he, as a high priest, was leading one of those war efforts, and he was killed in battle. So this is what we know a little bit about Yeshua, the son of Gamla. So, and Martha is the one that marries him. Okay, let's continue this story about Martha. So now there's this, she doesn't have a husband, she's now a widow another time, and there's a hunger, there's a famine in Jerusalem, there's no food. So she sends out her servant and says to him, go bring me some semida flour, which means bring me fine flour. That's all. I only eat the fine flour. Today's the other way around. I only eat the whole wheat, or I want the gluten-free or whatever. She wants the fine flour. Now, by the time he goes to the market, all the fine flour is already sold out. He comes back home and he tells her, sorry, ma'am, there's no more fine flour. But I saw ordinary flour on the market. So she says, fine, then go bring me ordinary flour. I'm starving. He goes out to the market. By the time he goes there, the ordinary flour was sold out. He comes back to her and he says, ma'am, I'm so sorry, but they've already sold out of ordinary flour. But there still is the gushkara flour, the coarse flour. Okay, she says, so bring me the gushkara flour. By the time he goes there and comes back, that's also already sold out. So he came and he tells her, there's no coarse flour, but there is barley flour. Now, barley flour in those days for sure was considered like animal food. The lowest of the low, the peasants, the poor people, they ate barley flour. But Martha would never dream of putting barley flour into her mouth. All she ever ate were the finest of delicacies. But here, she's desperate, so she says, go bring me some barley flour. Once again, by the time he gets to the market, all the barley flour is sold out. What should she do? So she realizes she's not having a lot of luck with her servant. So, and she was just in bed. She just took off her shoes. She's going for a rest. She's tired. She's hungry. She says, I need to eat something. I need to run out of here. So without putting her shoes on again, she was so desperate. She runs out of the house and she says, I'm going to go out myself and see if I can find something to eat. As she's running out of the house barefoot, she steps on some dung which stuck to her foot, and overcome by disgust, she died. That's how she died. Not from hunger in the end, although she was close to it, but from the disgust of having an experience that she'd never had before, but being in such a state of discomfort, a little something got onto her toe. I guess she didn't have little kids in her house for a long time, and she died. Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Zakkai, said about her. There's a verse in the Torah. The verse it's in the book of Deuteronomy, in the portion of the curses. The curses that Moses tells the Jewish people, God tells them that eventually, if you don't behave properly, all of these tragic circumstances are going to happen to you. So one of those verses say that the tender and delicate woman among you who would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground. Who is that? That's her. She puts her foot on the ground, she steps in something dirty, and she dies. That's one explanation of how she died. Another explanation, there are those who say that that's not why she died, but rather she ate a fig of Rabbi Tzadok and became disgusted and died. What are these figs of Rabbi Tzadok? And why did she become disgusted from eating these figs? So here's the story. Rabbi Tzadok was a very prominent rabbi, also a Kohen, during that time, the last few decades before the destruction of the temple. Already 40 years earlier, he foresaw things are on a decline. The behavior of the Jewish people is not so ay. The Romans are getting stronger. They're already trying to take over Jerusalem, take over Israel, take over the world. They've already given new names to many cities in Israel, turning them into Roman cities. And he foresees, he's not necessarily a prophet, but he knows that the end is coming soon. However, he thinks maybe we can change it. So if we do teshuvah, if we pray, if we turn our hearts and souls back to God, maybe we can turn things around. So he fasts for 40 years. Now, he fasts, meaning from sunrise to sunset. Every single day he would fast, and at nighttime he would eat a little something. And the fasting used to be for sure a mode, a practice of teshuvah. It kept the person, refraining from their own personal pleasures of life, which allowed them to be focused on God or on what's real and what's true. And here the case was, he's focused on restoring the dignity, the spiritual welfare of the Jewish people, and reconnecting them back with Hashem, and trying to provoke God's compassion to eradicate the Roman control. So he fasted for 40 years, praying that Jerusalem will not be destroyed. He became so emaciated from fasting that when he would eat something, it was visible from the outside of his body. Chas v'shalom, it's tragic to think about. He became so skinny, and you can have some image of this if you saw some people after the Holocaust, having spent months or years in a concentration camp. You saw how their bodies, and you saw everything, every bone was protruding out of their bodies. So when he would eat something, you would literally see it go down his innards and intestines. That's how skinny he was. And when he would eat after a fast, at some point he was so sick, when he wanted to eat and break his fast at nighttime, he literally couldn't eat any solids. Nothing could go down his throat. He had destroyed his whole digestive system. So they would bring him figs, and he would suck out their liquid and cast the rest away. So in those days, you couldn't buy fig juice on the market. They didn't have fancy juicers. And I guess fig was the choice because maybe there was some good nutrients and sugars and in there. They wanted him to eat figs, but he couldn't eat the solid. So he would suck out the innards, the juice, and the fruit from the fig. And then what would remain is just the outer part of it, the outer shell, and he would throw that away to the side of the road, outside his window or whatever. Like by the Israelis, they finish with their sameshkas, with their seeds, and they take the pills, and you could see piles and piles along all the cafes on the streets in Israel. That's the fig that Marta ate, according to the second opinion. She found a shell of a fig on the floor there. She ate it because she was so desperate and so hungry, but she died from it. What did she die from? So you may say, it could be that just of the knowledge that she ate a fig shell that was already sucked out by Rabbi Tzadok. It was in his mouth, it was in his body, and now it's being eaten by somebody else, and it's reached his lips. They didn't know about germs in those days, but to her, she was such an istanis, she was such a mefunak, such a finicky person, that just knowing that she ate from something that was in the hands or the mouth of somebody else, that already was enough to kill her. Or other commentaries say that actually, Rashi says that actually she tasted or she smelled the smell of Rabbi Tzadok's illness. So it was more than just the knowledge, but she actually felt Rabbi Tzadok's illness and his aura and his body odor or bad smell from all of his fasting, and that nauseated her to the extent that it eventually killed her. It's further related that as she was dying, it seems according to the second opinion, she didn't die right away. There was a process. She started to become sick and then die. In the first case, it says what? She stepped on the dung and then she died on the spot, it sounds like. But in this case, she began the process of dying. So she took out all her gold and silver, and she had plenty, and she threw it into the street, into the marketplace. And she said, "Why do I need this?" And as it's written, They shall cast their silver in the street, says the verse in Yecheskel, and their gold shall be as an impure thing. Their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They shall not satisfy their souls, neither fill their bowels. As Ezekiel said, all the money in the world cannot necessarily save you. Because if there's no food to eat, what can money do for you? Money can buy a lot of things, but it also cannot buy everything. It actually can't even buy those things that are really necessary for life. There's the famous legend, maybe it's a true story, maybe it's not, and depends who it's about, whether it's about a very wealthy noble in England during the 18th century. Some say it about Baron Rothschild, which I don't think is actually true, but there was some wealthy noble person who loved to spend time in his vault, counting his money. He had so much over there, and at one time he enters the vault and the door closes behind him, so he's locked into the vault, and no matter how much you knock, nobody can hear you. And here he is, surrounded by his millions and millions of dollars and gold coins, and yet he's dying of hunger. And he actually takes some blood from him and he writes on the wall, "Here I am, surrounded by all my wealth, and I, of all people, have died of hunger." There's a lot of things money cannot buy in life. Money cannot buy happiness. Money cannot buy a good relationship. Money cannot buy peace. Money can't buy love. Money can't buy a lot of things. It can do a lot, though. It's a good thing to have if you're able to get it in a healthy way. That is the story. That's a very tragic story, collateral damage that occurs during this time of the siege. And I think there must have been a lot of stories. Yeah, we don't know very many. The Talmud chooses to tell us this story. So I was thinking, so what can we learn? Why is the Talmud telling us this story? There's a number of lessons, and if you have some suggestions of what you've learned from this story, feel free to post it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'm going to share with you a few of my thoughts of what we can learn from the story. First of all, there's a number of contrasts here between different characters and different reactions during this crisis. In the beginning, we have the contrast between the three wealthy people and the Biryonim and the Zealots. And the wealthy people who have so much of their own personal wealth say to themselves, at this point in time, what value is there to us, to our wealth? We want to give it away. Let's give it to the community. Let's work on behalf of let's bring the community together. Let's feed them. Let's make sure we're all healthy. We all have each other. That was their primary concern. Conversely, you have the Biryonim, you have these Zealots, who in a sense say, we don't care about the welfare of the community. We care about our ideals. We believe we should fight. We're not going to go submissively to be caught into the hands of the Romans like sheep. We're going to go and fight till the very end. And if need be, we will bring in Romans to come and destroy and kill some of you, to apply pressure to you. And if need be, we will burn all the bridges. And if need be, we'll burn down all the food silos and the storage houses, killing lots of people. So this is already a huge contrast. There's always going to be a difference of opinions during a time of crisis, how to deal with it. That's true. But to enter into a state where it's your way or the highway, I'm right and you're wrong, to the extent that I'm willing to endanger you because of my opinion, is dangerous. I don't know what the opinions of these three wealthy people were, and I'm sure they didn't have necessarily the same opinion. But they also said, more than the opinion of how to deal with the Romans, first and foremost, how to deal with each other. How to make sure our welfare is in good health. So even now, during this pandemic, we've seen amazing people go out there with courage, with a lot of bravery, to help others. First responders, people in the hospitals, other volunteers, organizations that have gone out there, sometimes potentially endangering themselves or putting themselves in a state of inconvenience. But now is a time that we have to look out for each other. And there's the elderly and the frail and the more vulnerable, etc., etc. We have to be there for them. Everybody matters. Everybody counts. That's how a lot of people have reacted. Then we've seen others, sometimes community leaders, sometimes people playing politics, who knows what, that what it appears that some politics and some games and some other kind of personal biases and personal or political agendas were possibly part of the calculation of how to deal and how to react. And that may have endangered people's lives, and they may have made people suffer more than necessary. Again, it's hard to judge, like we say, but we can only see what we see. And there's something to be very impressed by the grace, by the dignity, by the enormous spirits of generosity of these three wealthy people. And there's something to be said in terms of protest against these zealots that not only endangered, but certainly killed so many people in their battle for God. Everyone's fighting their battle for God, but just because you feel differently than me doesn't mean you're right and I'm wrong. That's one important contrast. And apply that, take it to home, in our own lives, in your own family units, your own community units. Sometimes there's a politics in a community, decisions to make on a board level, monetary decisions, leadership decisions, who to hire, et cetera, et cetera. It's okay to have difference of opinions, but you're in this together. You're on the same team. To do something that would endanger, that would harm the other is literally selfish. It's small-minded. It's wrong. It's a terrible way to deal with anything. Nobody wins out of that. You cannot solve a crisis when you're busy endangering and harming your own people. You can never do that. Next, let's contrast the next characters of the story. Martha with Rabbi Tzadok. Okay? I think they're two very different people. How ironic that it's the very thing which saves the life of Rabbi Tzadok, which ends up ending the life of Martha, according to one opinion. The fig which restores strength and life to Rabbi Tzadok is the fig that ends up killing Martha. Often it's the one thing, it could be the same thing in life in a crisis, that in one situation, in one person, it becomes their source of strength, it becomes their source of recovery and the solution, and to another it could be the end, the destruction. Sometimes, let's say there's a crisis in a family, chas v'shalom, a child's ill or passes away. Sometimes that can bring a relationship, a couple together in an unbelievable way, that they learn to love and respect each other in ways they never had before. They saw new insight into each other. They gained deeper understanding of each other. And this tragedy brought them closer. In another situation, the tragedy can tear apart a family. Again, we don't judge because we don't even know the dynamics in every family, and every situation is different. But think about, if we want to be able to be prepared for chas v'shalom, if we should ever be sent by God the test of a tragedy, think about how some tragedies can strengthen a family unit, or strengthen a community unit, or strengthen a nation. And sometimes it can really tear apart a nation. Has COVID brought our nation together, or has it torn us apart? And I'm sure there's a bit of both, and every community and every family and every state can reflect on that. Very important. Let's think about other lessons from the story. Let's start with the general overview, a general view of the story. What happens here? Martha one day asks her servant to go out and to buy some fine flour. Now, if she's asking that to her servant, that must mean that up until very recently, up until yesterday, she probably was able to purchase fine flour, which is why she tries again today. And today, for the first time, he can't purchase fine flour. He can't purchase mediocre flour. He can't even purchase low-level flour. He can't even purchase barley flour. In one day, so quickly, everything changed. Sometimes when Hashem makes a crisis, it can happen very quickly. Sometimes it's very slow. It's gradual. It evolves into something. But it could be very quickly. The same is the other way around. When Hashem grants a blessing, salvation, it can also happen very quickly. Look at the Jews leaving Egypt. In one day, in one moment, they were slaves, they were tortured, they were persecuted, they were battered. And a moment later, at the moment of redemption we speak about at Seder night on Pesach, they are now the wealthiest people. And they're now given all the wealth and all the riches and the gold and the silver from the Egyptians, and they're walking out a free nation, a wealthy nation. Look how everything turned overnight. Look at the story with Yosef in the Torah portions we're reading. In one moment, he's a prisoner, stuck with no power, no fame, no influence. And a moment later, because Pharaoh has dreams and the butler remembers, Yosef can decipher dreams, let's bring him up. A moment later, he's second to the king, second in power of the superpower of Egypt. Things can change very quickly. COVID. Look how quick COVID came into our world. It didn't happen gradually over many months. Literally within days, everything locked down. Masks were being put on. Look how much our lives changed. Jobs, restaurants closed, stores closed, industries closed, planes stopped flying. Our whole world will collapse so quickly. We have to recognize, no matter what state you're in life, if you're in a very fortunate state, a very unfortunate state, Yeshuas Hashem keheref ayin. The salvation of God can happen like the blink of an eyelid. That's what the blink of an eyelid. That's what it says. And sometimes you can't imagine, how's it ever going to change? How am I going to get out of this? Oh, I need so much money, or I need so much help. I don't know how. It can happen so quickly. Believe it could happen. Just like disaster and tragedy can happen so quickly, salvation and blessing can happen in ways that you never thought of, you never imagined, you couldn't see a path, and it just hits you like that. Another important lesson from the story. Gary writes, Shalom Bayis is critical to Jewish continuity. 100%, Gary. Let's put that on the screen so everyone can see that. Peace. Peace is critical to the Jewish community. A community only survives when there is peace, and peace begins in the home. So if you want to be a man of peace, first learn how to make peace with your own spouse and your own children. Be a hero to your spouse, be a hero to your children, and then be a hero to the community. Unfortunately, how many people are possibly heroes to the community, but not heroes to their own family? And that's very tragic. So that's been the secret of the Jewish people throughout 3,500 years. Our strength has been our focus, our emphasis, our nurturing of the family unit, the marriage, the children, the support, the love, the rituals that are all surrounded around strengthening the family unit. That is the way a community survives and thrives. So thank you, Gary. Another thing to learn. I was just thinking about the servant a little bit. This servant, a worthless servant, he goes out because he's ordered to buy fine flour. He goes to the marketplace and he sees there's no fine flour. Now, what should he be thinking? He should be thinking, well, she's hungry. There's a famine in the land. All the food is getting burned down. I better get at least something. No. She asks for fine flour. There's no fine flour. He comes back. She says, get it. The other one, he comes back. He goes 4 times to the marketplace and comes up with nothing. In a way, he caused her death. Because if the very first time he went to the marketplace, there was no fine flour, but there was regular flour available, he would have bought it. She would have lived for longer at least. So what was his fault? What was his crime? He was so literal that he didn't use common sense to think about the big picture and to truly recognize what is needed right now. There's no virtue in being so literal without understanding the context. Sometimes it's a command from the Torah. It's a command from your spouse, from your loved one. And of course, you want to obey. But the obeying, this command, this instruction, has to be within the context of what is the purpose over here. And if you're just focusing on the tree and you've forgotten about the forest, that could be very harmful. I remember many years ago, my wife taught me an unbelievable lesson. We had friends who were They were going through a very hectic time in a good way. They were having a big simcha, and maybe the wife gave birth to a baby. I don't remember when now, but there was a lot going on, and they had family coming to town. It must have been a very hectic time for them. So my wife told me to call them, ask them if they need any help. What can we do for them? So I called him and I said, listen, what can we do for you? We want to help you. And he said, no, everything is fine. Thank you so much for calling. We're okay. So I told my wife, they're okay. She said, what are you calling? What do you mean they're okay? I'm going to cook up a dinner right now, and you're going to deliver it to them. I cooked up a dinner. My wife cooked the dinner, and I delivered it to them. Later, he tells me, you have no idea how thankful I am. You called and you asked me, what am I going to say? I need something? I'm going to say everything's okay. What do you mean everything's okay? How can everything be okay? Of course I need help. Don't ask. What are you asking? Already the question is silly. You don't ask. You just do. You do what needs to be done. You know the right thing. In fact, someone later once told me, actually, it shouldn't be you delivering the food, because then they can always say, no, thank you so much, but I want to send the Uber, send the Uber Eats, send someone else to deliver the food. They can't reject it. It came to their house. They may be embarrassed to take it, but now they're not embarrassed to take it. You call your spouse, your loved one. Do you need anything? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. No. Don't ask them the question. You need to do what needs to get done. So this servant was silly. Of course, he should have bought any flour available, but he's busy focusing on the trees, busy trying to be literal without understanding context, and she ends up dying. And so too when we do a mitzvah, whatever it is that we're doing, what's context? What are you trying to achieve over here? Are you doing something of greater benefit to your own spiritual life, to your own health? Are others gaining from this? Or are you in such a small space that you're technically seeming like you're observing a particular law, but there's no context over here, and no one else is gaining from it, or someone else is being harmed by it? That cannot be the intention of the Torah. Another powerful lesson to learn. Finally, I think Martha, this woman, was an unhealthy person, and money was the cause of her being unhealthy. Right? Like King Solomon says that money can often hijack the possessor. Wealth is a very big test. There's two big tests in life: wealth and poverty. Thank God I've never been in a huge state of poverty. I've also never been in a huge state of wealth. So I don't know about these two tests. I have enough tests. We all have our tests. But the very poor man has a big test, and the very wealthy man. And it's possible that the test of the wealthy man is even harder than the test of the poor man. Money is an unbelievable tool. Money makes the world go round. Money can be the source of a lot of blessing, a lot of support, a lot of generosity, a lot of goodwill, a lot of kindness. But money can be the source of money can make you meshuggah. Money can blind you. Money can disconnect you from reality. It can disconnect you from people. Martha was disconnected with reality. She was used to always getting her way by virtue of her money. We know of a story that one Yom Kippur, her husband, who was then the high priest, was reading the Torah. She wanted to go hear the Torah from her husband, but she didn't want to walk on the street and get her shoes dirty. So she ordered her servants to lay out the red carpet all the way from her house, all the way to the temple. I don't know how far she lived, but either way, so she wouldn't have to walk. When a person behaves that way, and a person chooses to make themselves so different from everybody else, and a person wants to flaunt their wealth in such a manner, that is so unhealthy. And that disconnected her with reality. Never forget, it doesn't matter how much money you have, to be one of the people, to be a person. Because if you want to be able to be connected with other people, and then you want to learn how to have empathy to other people, you want to understand the plight of other people, situations and challenges that they're in, you can never be like that if you've completely cushioned yourself in this bubble. Martha was in a bubble. So much so that there's a state of hunger going on, and the whole community is suffering, and she's ordering fine flour for herself. Martha, do you know what's going on? People are dropping dead on the streets. The Zealots are burning down all the food supplies. It's a crisis. It's the ghetto. we're in siege. And she sits there with her shoes off on her bed, relaxed. I need my fine flour. Marta, something is wrong with you. And so much so, eventually, when she has to get up on her own and go out to the street to do, she's shocked. She has to leave her bubble. She's so unprepared. She's so unequipped to face the real world, real reality, real people, real situations, real challenges. She drops dead because she'd been cushioned by this bubble her whole life that she was unable and unequipped to deal with a real life challenge and situation. So no matter how fortunate you are and blessed with wealth, and you should be blessed with a lot of wealth, and use it wisely, always remember that the purpose of that is not just to build for yourself this bubble, this cocoon, this ivory tower around you, and you're disconnected from the real people and the real life situations. The money should empower you to better understand and better connect other people, so you can know the needs of others, so you can help others. That's the whole point of it. And if that's not what it's doing for you, then money is your enemy, not your friend. It's destroying you. Look at the end of the story. The end of the story is that she has tons of gold and tons of silver that she's actually throwing it all out on the street. So think about that. First of all, when we started learning the story, the Gemara says there were 3 wealthy, prominent people in Jerusalem: Ben Kalba Savua, Ben Tzitzakeses, and Nakdima Ben Gurion. Somebody's missing on that list. Who's missing? Martha. Why is she not on the list? Because Martha was the miser. Nobody benefited from Martha. She never gave a penny to charity. She kept it all for herself. She was not worthy of mention of being one of the prominent, wealthy people who helped the community. She never helped the community, even though she could have, incredibly. And when she's dying, you think she takes her money and gives it to the tzedakah cause and to put it in people's bank accounts and to pay their bills. She's not even thoughtful about that. She doesn't have that kind of inclination. She just throws it in the streets as if it's of no value to her and therefore of no value to anyone else, and she throws it out. That's the lesson that the Gemara is teaching us. And Rabbi Tzadok is the other way around. Rabbi Tzadok doesn't have much money, but he knows that whatever he can do, he can pray, he can study, he can fast. He wants to dedicate his efforts not for himself. He wants to pray for the welfare of the community. He wants to save the community. He wants to pray to God for God to bring miracles to destroy the Romans and to save the community and restore Jewish life in Jerusalem. And he fasts for 40 years and he becomes sick and he almost dies. But the people need his prayers. That's what he felt. So we have a lot of contrasting personalities dealing with this crisis. And the most important thing is for us to take this home and reflect on it. Now in our crisis, or in any crisis you go through in life. How to deal with it. It's not easy. You need help, you need support, you need someone to talk to, someone to guide you. But turn to those who love you. There are those who love you. And work it out. And remain level-headed. And hold on to faith. And recognize that salvation from God can come in the blink of an eyelid. And recognize that there's a creator, and there's by design, and there's a reason. Hang in there. Hold on to your faith. Hold on to your courage. Hold on to your dignity. Hold on to your Tselem Elokim, your godly image, which knows how to be graceful and favorable and kind and sharing and giving and selfless and connecting with others and caring about others. That is the way to deal with the crisis. Please God, we should never enter such a state. However, be prepared. Thanks for joining us, my friends. If you have more lessons from the story, please let me know. Please message me. I'd love to hear them. Thank you for joining us. Easy fast on Friday. And God bless you. See you next week.